How you guys doing? Eric here. Today is Tuesday, June 27th, 2017. Nice warm breeze blowing up here in Gilpin County, Colorado. Lots of chemtrails, clouds in the sky. But yeah, so I think I got an interesting topic to talk about today. The Beatles, the whole Beatles conspiracy, and the alleged death of Paul McCartney in 1966. So let's get into it. So yeah. So I'm 50 years old, so I was born in Burbank, California in 1967, and growing up in Southern California in the early 70s, the Beatles were everywhere, man. It was my parents had all the Beatles records, and all my friends had all the Beatles records, and we listened to them a lot. I remember when I was in the third grade, we even did on the talent show, we did a Beatles. We played the record, and we all had tennis rackets, and we pretended like we were singing. It was terrible, but yeah, that's how much we were into the Beatles when I was a kid. Especially this one friend of mine, Joey Zaitchik. He was really into the Beatles. But so yeah, I grew up listening to the Beatles a lot when I was a kid, and I was a big fan. I remember watching all their cartoons and their movies, and man, I remember every year the Yellow Submarine would come on, the cartoon, man, and man, all the kids in the neighborhood, we'd all get together, and man, we'd all watch the Yellow Submarine, and it was awesome, man. It was like the greatest thing on, besides the Monster Marathon with Godzilla and King Kong. But yeah, so the story goes that in 1966, Paul McCartney was driving his car with his girlfriend, and I guess they ran into a rainstorm, and I guess something happened, and he crashed his car and was killed. I guess he was decapitated in the car crash. That's how the rumor goes. That's the myth, that McCartney died in a car crash in his Mini Cooper, I think it was. That's what I just heard on the video I just watched. He was driving a Mini Cooper, allegedly, and crashed and died. So after that, the Beatles were all scrambling. This is all alleged. It's all, a story about Paul McCartney's death. But so they didn't, the whole, even it goes so deep as the MI5, which is the British, intelligence, like James Bond shit, were involved in it, in replacing Paul McCartney, because the Beatles were so huge. They were just like this. They were the biggest fucking brainwashing propaganda, mass brainwashing is what the music industry is. I've come to become jaded. I'm not the Beatles fan I was when I was younger, because I'm not the fan of any kind of music like I used to be, because I learned how fucking corrupt and evil and satanic the music industry is, and the Beatles were no exception. They were just another. When I was a kid, everybody wanted to be a rock star, right? Because, they made it so appealing to us. We thought it was a real thing, that anybody who was good enough and practiced and made up some really good music could become famous. That's what we thought. Especially where I grew up in Southern California. A lot of famous rock bands came out of there, and so yeah, I learned about how corrupt and evil the music industry is later in life, once I started waking up. And so yeah, the Beatles were no exception to that. All of it, man. The whole music industry is just jaded to me now. I don't really have as much reverence for it as I did when I was a kid, because I learned about all that. But so anyways, back to the Beatles conspiracy. So there was this guy named Billy Sheen, William something Sheen, and he won a Paul McCartney lookalike contest, and that's supposedly the guy that replaced him. And so yeah, and then so I was looking at all the evidence, about there's evidence in their album covers, like in the Abbey Road album cover, which is the first album they made after '66, and it shows. They say, like, you know, John Lennon's in front. He's wearing white, so he's like a godly figure. And then Ringo Starr's walking in the second place, crossing the street, and he's wearing black, so he's like the Undertaker. And then it shows Paul McCartney walking third, barefooted, and he's out of stride with the rest of them. And so he represents the dead corpse. And then there's George Harrison in the rear, and he's dressed in denim like he's the gravedigger. That's how the rumor goes about that album cover. And then there's the Sgt. Pepper album cover, well, there's one picture on the back of the sleeve that shows the 4 Beatles, and Paul McCartney has a patch on his arm that says OPD, I think, which stands for officially pronounced dead. And then on the front of the cover, they have all the people there, all these famous people on the back of or on the cover of Sgt. Pepper, and it shows two versions of the Beatles, the Sgt. Pepper Beatles, and then it shows the Beatles from the early '60s, and the different. Paul McCartney has a mustache, and the old ones, of course, he didn't have a mustache. So. And then there's the Let It Be album, where it shows all the Beatles are looking away from the camera, all 3 of them except McCartney, and they all have a white background. And then it shows Paul McCartney, he's looking right at the album cover. He's looking right at the camera, and he's got a red background, like a blood red background. So there's another clue. But yeah, there's a lot of clues in their album covers. And before that, all their sleeves were white. And then after '66, they had red album sleeves. So yeah, there's a lot of clues in their album covers and in their song lyrics. It's like, I think I first heard about this one guy I knew back in the early '90s when I lived in Texas, or I lived in Las Vegas. And this guy, he was like a real simple guy from Texas, and he lived out there in the desert outside of Las Vegas, and I used to go to his house and hang out, and we'd drink beer and smoke weed and listen to music. And he was like a fundamentalist kind of. He believed that the earth was only like 5,000 years old or something. But he was the first person that ever told me that about the Paul McCartney, that he was dead, you know. And he played the song Glass Onion, you know, like a glass onion has many layers, but it's transparent, and there's a lot of. It's a very you know, cryptic song. There's a lot of like riddles in the song. I told you about this, and you heard about that, and here's another clue for you all. The walrus was Paul, and yeah, that's one of the songs that he showed me that kind of had the clues hidden. There's a bunch of other ones, like, you know, he blew his mind out in a car. He didn't notice that the light had changed. So that they say that's a reference to the car accident, and he was decapitated. So he blew his mind out in a car. Interesting. And then later on, there's a lyric in Paul McCartney's solo career, the band On the Run. There's a lot of people think the opening lyrics to that is, well, the rain exploded with a mighty crash as they fell into the sun. And they're saying that's when they crashed the car, him and his girlfriend, and then falling into the sun was like dying. So there's another clue in some of the lyrics, this time from a Paul McCartney and the Wings song. So there's another interesting bit of, and there's all kinds of them in so many Beatles songs. I couldn't even get into all of them right in this video, but personally I really like the Beatles songs where Ringo Starr sings. I think he was a great singer. But yeah, and then speaking of Ringo Starr, recently he did an interview where he basically came out and spilled the beans and said that, yeah, Paul McCartney did die in 1966. And so that's probably the most compelling piece of evidence. And they say that's probably a good reason why maybe Lennon was murdered and George Harrison died in his strange way, because maybe they were coming out telling the truth. And you know, it goes into why they would do all this, you know, because like I said before, Beatles were such a big part of their, you know, it's like MI5 brainwashing, you know. They use movies and music industry to control the minds of the masses. But one of the reasons they gave was if all the people in England found out that Paul McCartney had died, there would have been mass suicides. That's how ridiculous it all is, and how brainwashed people are, man, by this. It's very powerful. I think the human mind is made to be easily controlled. And yeah, music industry and, you know, the movies and all that is all how they do it. One of the ways they do it. But yeah, well, so what do I think about it all myself? Well, personally, you know, I do. I believe it's true. Just because if you look at the side-by-side pictures of him, his face was shorter and pudgier, you know, when he was younger, and he was shorter actually. He actually grew, because before he was like a little bit shorter than Lennon, and then after 66 he was taller than Lennon, and his face was longer. He grew the mustache, and you know, nobody really noticed it. And yeah, I think it's true. They replaced him, whether he died or not. Who knows? It even goes into a theory that he was murdered. It goes so deep. So yeah, that's my thoughts on it. I think it's probably true. I think I noticed it, you know, when I was a kid, how he looked different, and I just never really clicked until just, you know, the last couple years, you know, when it's become really famous on the internet, you know. So anyway, yeah, that's my thoughts on the whole Beatles, Paul McCartney death conspiracy. I think it's pretty fucking interesting, though. I do. So that's why I thought I'd make a little video about it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you guys soon.
About a lucky man who made the grade. And though the news was rather sad, well, I just